Africa continues to face a DNA backlog, delaying arrest and prosecutions, particularly in rape cases. In September, Police Minister Newzroom told Parliament that about 1,400 rape cases were thrown out of court due to insufficient evidence. This week, the DNA board found that the South African Police Service's forensic labs were by large a margin behind the collection, testing as well as assessment of samples. Joining us now is the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Policing, Ian Cameron. Ian, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time for us this morning. In February, to much fanfare, the then Minister of Police, Bheki Cele, announced that the DNA backlog had been cleared. Then what happened?
Good morning, thank you. Yeah, so I think it might have been the initial, like a ring-fenced amount that may have been cleared. But unfortunately, as you can imagine, a large amount of cases come in every single day. And therefore, there is still a major backlog. At the moment, what we've last heard is that it's more or less around 70,000 cases. And to really put it in layman's terms, I think you can look at about 3 to 4 pieces of evidence per case, per one of those cases, to determine the amount of pieces of evidence that still need to be processed.
Yeah, do we know where the fault lines are with regards to this? Is it an issue of funding?
I don't believe it's an issue of funding. I think there's several factors to take into consideration. The COVID-19 time period had a significant impact on causing delays. I also think that sometimes there are unrealistic expectations of a small amount of these cases, things that are more difficult to process or that do take slightly longer. There are a whole lot of technicality to take into consideration. But I think one of the biggest issues is rather the lack of expert people. Not so much in the labs. We've got significant people that work in the labs in South Africa, in the different labs. But I think there's rather a challenge with regards to the amount of those knowledgeable people that are there. And then unfortunately, we've really come to a time where we simply do not have enough people. And when we do, unfortunately, some of the unions sometimes make it very difficult to really make those labs function properly. And then with the issue of consumables, things that are needed to get the job done aren't procured in time. We also very often don't see that tender processes are resolved quickly, and therefore we often run out of the necessary consumables, which obviously puts the labs under pressure. And then lastly, I think we've got an opportunity to actually engage in partnerships with different entities. I visited UCT last week, and it was incredible to see the capacity that they are able to put on the table. So why not engage in further partnerships with academic institutions to really process the needed evidence faster?
In which way do the unions become a stumbling block?
Well, what happened in COVID-19 is obviously there were health and safety risks that was supposedly causing a threat, and it made it difficult for X amount of people to be able to work in the lab at any given time. And so the amount of people processing at that stage was limited. And then also the amount of hours that they were working were also limited and impacted. And instead of going to figure out how many or what other venues or facilities we can engage with and continue to work through, we rather just limited the capacity at the existing labs, which I don't think was the right move. It was slightly counterproductive. And so there were fights with the police at that stage. And I understand some of the points. I think it's just important that it's not at the cost of South Africans, We must make sure that we have all hands on deck when it comes to combating crime.
Yeah, and here's the thing about it also is the impact that it has on individuals who actually have their cases being linked to DNA and whether those cases will be solved or not. In one of the articles that we came across, they speak about a man who had been charged in 2016 for rape, and to date, the DNA results have not been released.
Yeah, and unfortunately, what also happens, Aldrin, is that sometimes the DNA is actually lost. The evidence is actually lost. They simply do not have the capacity to process everything, and they simply do not process certain kinds of DNA. And if we don't follow up on certain cases, I don't think we'll ever really get an answer. So it's very difficult. And I can tell you again, the people in the labs themselves aren't necessarily the issue. I think there's a leadership question that we need to ask. This past weekend, we announced that the Police Portfolio Committee last week adopted a report that indicated that we recommend lifestyle and skills audits to be done amongst police management. And with regards to the skills audit, I think this engages the forensic question quite well too, to determine whether we have the correct people in leadership positions there. Because I don't always think that the people on the ground are the big problem. I think the big problem comes with middle and top management that don't always seem to be in the right positions, or that when they are appointed in certain positions, they don't have the any kind of skill to even be in the police, never mind in a specific portfolio.
Yeah. You spoke about UCT a bit earlier on. Do you think that there is potential collaboration, perhaps maybe with the private sector as well? For instance, if we look at some of the collaboration that took place during the height of COVID-19, is that a possibility?
I think it's always a possibility. Private sector is slightly more challenging just with regards to legislation and accreditation and so on. What makes a university like UCT attractive in this sense is that they already work together on quite a bit of work with the state pathologist as well, with the health department. They process a large amount of bodies every year with regards to autopsies and everything at the mortuary that is next to UCT. In Salt River, and it is really incredible to see. It's a state-of-the-art facility, and the good thing about the fact that it is there and that they already are part of this process is that they have all the necessary accreditation and they fit into existing legislation to work with the authorities to process whatever needs to be processed. So it's a phenomenal opportunity. I think the challenge is fundraising to make sure that your lab, your DNA lab, is significantly or properly rather kitted out. Now, obviously, I'm not the technical expert on it. These are all things that I've learned over time. So I've got limited knowledge, but I can tell you that in terms of accreditation, it's a very, very easy yes, and that they can certainly work together quite quickly, and it will definitely relieve pressure off the police.
Yeah. Is there a case to be made around whether or not our laboratories, specifically the ones that are being used by the South African Police Service, are fit for purpose, also taking into consideration the increase in population? But earlier on, for instance, we were speaking about the sewage that is spilling into the rivers, and one of the points that came out there was also around whether the system itself has the capacity to deal with an increased number in the population. And if we look at how under-resourced SAPS is, are these laboratories fit for purpose if we take into consideration the increase in population numbers?
So I think they are under significant pressure. I think some of them are actually fit for purpose. They just need to be managed correctly, and the correct leadership needs to be in place. And with all the correct consumables and whatever else is needed to get the job done, I think if led properly, they can work. But there are some of them that are significantly lacking. If you look at the forensic lab in Amanzimtoti in KZN, it floods almost every year. Every time there's heavy rain, it floods. So it's just not practical. And it cannot function at 100% because of this constant problem with regards to flooding. And that's a very basic issue, but it's just an example to you. And then again, I don't think, Aldrin, that we actually have the luxury of not partnering with, for example, universities or even the private sector, because as you correctly said, the growth in population, increasing trends of crime and so on, obviously puts a large burden on these facilities. And if you then struggle with basics like the consumables that you need to do processing with, it obviously puts you under immense pressure.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. Ian Cameron is the chairperson of Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Policing.